Welcome to another episode of Hollywood Kitchen. This is sort of a surprise pop-up episode, and this is probably one of the more obscure people that we've ever covered, which I like. I love the idea of mixing very iconic stars with really obscure names from Hollywood's past as well. Today, we have my friend and past collaborator and author, Mary Mallory. Mary Mallory is the author of many books on classic Hollywood history. She writes also for numerous publications, and she is involved with Hollywood Heritage. So, welcome to your Hollywood Kitchen debut.
Thank you.
And all right, before we get started, tell me why we're covering this particular person, because you have a new book that just came out, by the way, called First Women of Hollywood, and it's female film pioneers in the early motion picture business. And we talked about the different names we could have covered from this book, but ultimately we settled on probably the most obscure, but it's really awesome, and there's a great reason why. We're going to talk about a woman named Delight Evans. Delight Evans actually published her own cookbook called Delight Evans Hollywood Recipes, which I have a vintage copy right here. And so we're going to get started and we're going to make Delight Evans' recipe for Turkish delight, or I'm going to talk about what happened when I tried to make it. So, Mary, welcome, and tell us who Delight Evans was.
Well, Cordelia Delight Evans was born in 1901 in a small town in Indiana and she grew up with the movies, basically. Fell in love with it, started going like as a young kid, teenagers going, and she wrote prose. So she would write prose first in her local paper and reviewing, and then started sending things to Photoplay magazine, which at 15 years old, they were publishing things, not knowing she was 15 years old, prose. Even went to New York to meet an editor. So by the time like she's 16, 17, she gets hired, well, basically full-time, she's like 17, when stars would come through Chicago on their way east and west to interview them for the magazine. So she gets her first job. She and her mother moved to Chicago, and from then on, she wrote for the movies. Photoplay magazine prose and columns. Eventually, late 20s, would be full editor of and a chief of Screenland magazine.
Nice.
Newspapers occasionally. Ended up with her own radio show in the 30s, only 13 episodes. But so she was one of the early writers. And in the 30s, she, I think, recognized the female influencers of the time of writing for the young women, what would intrigue them and get them to go to the movies.
Okay.
So
now let me ask you this about her radio show.
Yeah.
What was the radio show called, and where can I find it today? Because it was about food, and I really, really wish it still existed. So tell me about this radio show.
So I also Delight, because of the writing for the newspapers, she pitched the American Stove Company. There we go. To do it was a 13-week. If it, I guess, had been picked up, it would have been longer. But to do recipes of the stars. It was like Delight Evans, Food Secrets of the Movie Stars. So she would come on, it was a 30-minute show. Occasionally, like a celebrity would come, but she would either get recipes from stars, or the ones that came on, they would make stuff, particularly because they wanted to use the stoves. It had to be something that could be cooked. And it helps when you're an editor of a magazine. She went through the files of the paper, and many of these stars, the photos in here, are not recipes or had anything to do with the show. She pulled them, but she covered her bases, because the beginning says here, it is understood that in the use of stars' names and photographs in this booklet, there is no endorsement, either real or implied, of the product herein advertised. So, so she was making that and talking about the movies, unfortunately, and cooking. Obviously, they're having to promote the stove company.
Of course, there's always got to be a promotional aspect or a plug, if you will.
So I guess it did not make the ratings that they wanted, and so it was only a 13-episode thing. But so she was appealing to women in a variety of ways, of things that would attract I would think this is more older women, whereas a lot of the columns she wrote were things that would for like younger women.
Okay. Well, let me ask you this. Is there any way I can listen to her radio show? Because when we were working on this episode, putting together, I kept trying to do searches on all these old radio show websites and pages, and I turned up with nothing. So is there any way I can listen to her radio show?
Well, I have to go back and look, but I don't think it was a major network that ran it, which makes it a
Okay.
problem. Even if the networks, NBC and like CBS, they often had archives. It's often though hard to track stuff down or to get clearance to get copies of said shows. And if you're on a minor network, to hope it survives, or that the company that the stove company actually would have kept stuff in their archives. So yeah, that's actually something I'm interested in just to hear what she sounds like. I've never heard her
Yeah.
talk, so.
Yeah, that's such a bummer. Now, the recipe that I chose to make, I had to make it before Mary came over because of complexities. And this proved to be hands down the biggest culinary disaster I've had yet in Hollywood Kitchen, which is not a small statement here. We made Turkish delight. Now, what year? I got it from an article that Mary sent me, and it was a Delight Evans attributed recipe of Turkish delight. What year was that article published?
I would believe it. I think it's the late teens.
Late teens. Okay. Because I follow the late teens recipe, and here's where things went wrong. Okay. In order to make the Turkish delight, as said in the late teens recipe, what we're supposed to do was take gelatine, which I did find, add very cold water and let it sit for 10 minutes, which I did. It worked. And then you boil water on the stove with 2 cups of sugar. And then you add the juice of a lemon, the juice of a lime. I didn't do the nut meats, as it were, but you can add nut meats or nuts. And then you add all of the ingredients together. You add the sugar, the water, the gelatine, and it said boil for 20 minutes. Now that I was like, 20 minutes sounds like kind of a long time. Okay. So I put the ingredients on my stove and I thought I'm going to set my timer for 20 minutes. I'll check back like in 5 just to see what's going on. I checked back in 5 once I smelled something burning. I came into my kitchen and basically it went and bubbled all over the stove and covered the entire top of my stove in this apartment with jello, water, and just huge mess. And it was also crystallizing and burning. So I have been cleaning like a complete maniac for like the last day trying to get this mess undone. However, I was still determined to finish this as much as I could. So I added the orange and the lemon juice. I added the rind of the orange. I combined everything. And it said to put it in a bread pan and then put it on a tray with cold water. I guess that was maybe their way of refrigeration.
Yeah.
But I tried that and it said let it set. I tried that method, it didn't set at all. And I waited forever, didn't set. So I finally figured, okay, then you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to put it in the refrigerator, which I did. I got it out of the refrigerator today. And I did the thing where you cut it into squares and then you sprinkle the powdered sugar or roll it in the powdered sugar. The problem is the powdered sugar starts to vanish very quickly when you roll it. And here's what my effort looked like right here. But I think in a perfect world, it's supposed to look a little more like this with the powdered sugar on top of the Turkish delight.
I have a feeling probably they had different ingredients in the gelatine then than they do now. And that affects things and possibly water because if we even we come through a water supply of how things of what that kind of thing. So I mean otherwise I can't think of what the
Well, and also my stove, the landlord put in a brand new stove when I moved in and it's pretty darn powerful stuff. So 5 minutes it was boiling over and making a gigantic mess as opposed to like an old fashioned stove. Who knows what kind of stove she made this on in like 1919 or whatever. So I'm going to try this for the first time. Do you want to, dare we? I'm just going to take a little bit because I honestly don't know what I'm even getting myself into here. So should we do a Turkish delight toast to Delight Evans?
Okay, yes.
Turkish delight toast. Bam. Okay. Okay. Um,
Yeah, not bad.
Bam. I did go down a Turkish delight rabbit hole a little bit as one
Well,
does.
and I think probably one of the reasons she did the recipe, the Delight. And Delight was her nickname. She was supposedly an enthusiastic, passionate person, such a delight that that's where
Mm.
she got her nickname instead of Cordelia.
Guessing if she were on social media today, she would be really good at it because she sounds like she was like the queen of branding at
Yeah,
the time.
yeah.
So basically, I've read that Turkish delight goes back to like the late 1700s or something, and it was very popular in Turkey and Iran and Greece and big parts of the Middle East, and a lot of different countries have kind of claimed credit for
Yeah.
having invented Turkish delight. It's kind of in dispute which country kind of has that honor, but since it's called Turkish delight, I'm tempted to think maybe Turkey. And I've seen it in stores too,
Yes.
also. But in stores, it seems like a harder
Yeah,
candy.
it's like a
And
candy.
because this is more like it's the article you sent me said it was a candy, but with the gelatine, it comes out more like pieces of jello.
So as I'm thinking that the ingredients and stuff were different in and who knows, maybe in the brand she used it, and I'm sure it doesn't even exist anymore in this day and
Yeah,
age, because yeah, the ones I've always seen have been like candy,
exactly.
not like gelatin.
So I think I'd like to go to a store at some point and buy an actual Turkish delight and kind of compare it to what I've made. All I can say for myself is I kind of did the best I can
Yeah.
with what I had to work with.
Yeah, so
So,
I think there was some of that the same way. I mean, some of these recipes are easier than others.
mhm,
There's all kinds of pudding, cheese pudding. I had no idea there was cheese pudding, spinach
mhm.
ring. Um, okay, certain things I don't care about. Kidney saute Madeira.
Mhm.
Let's see. Avocados with crab meat.
I've made that. We made that. It was attributed to
This is Gilpatrick.
gosh, Norma Shear, I think we did one of those.
Um, Sweet bread and mushroom patties.
Oof.
Turbot of fish.
Turban of fish.
Yeah. So there are
Oh,
some,
no wonder we went with this.
yeah, some interesting names. And so, yeah, and just some of the pictures are scene stills, and some are actually, there would have been publicity stills of people posing in front of like the stove and that kind of stuff, or with their dog. There's
Hey, a cute dog is everything,
so
so who
there,
can object to
Ian
that?
Hunter with his dog.
Okay, so let's talk. We've talked
Yes.
about the food now.
Yes.
Let's talk about this book.
Yes.
Tell me where you got the idea for this book, and also what I like about it is you illuminate the stories of some really obscure, really forgotten women. So, how did you find these women? How did you decide which stories to tell?
Okay, well, so I had been reading books. And during the pandemic, I had time to search things out too. But covering over the last 20 years, people really started looking into, thanks to digital databases, of women that were forgotten or how important they were in the early part. Um, that one of the things I did during the pandemic for a poster collector friend is I basically created a database going through city directories and trade magazines and all that kind of stuff of, you name it, of different titles of things, and picking people out. And so it was like, so for first women, people always say like a guy was the first to do it, or they promote the guy. Well, women did virtually everything in Hollywood. That's one reason of doing this. So you can show they weren't just writers and editors or actresses. They did poster designing. They were set decorators. They were property masters. They created posters. So things you would expect, makeup, costume, but in distribution sales executives. Who knew that women in 1915 were going to states rights people and trying to sell movies? So
Wow.
trying to give them their due. A lot of these women were known at the time. You go through trade magazines and newspapers, but now no one has ever heard of these people. So it became, because Margaret Herrick Library did not have clipping files or photo files on most of these women. So it meant going through every kind of newspaper database there was, Media History Digital Library, Variety Archives, their entertainment trade archives, looking for material. Because there was a little bit in some archives, but it ended up a lot of our vintage books. I mean, literally going back to like the 20s to find articles about, some of these women. And so sometimes I was be researching one person and the name of another woman would come up.
Okay.
So, like my makeup person, I was researching another person at MGM. Her name is Lillian Rosine, and it pops up. Oh, here's the woman in charge of the women's makeup department at MGM. I find out from various collectors and historians, they had no idea. They never heard of this woman because they knew of the man who became head of the MGM's makeup department in 37. They had been in men's head and woman's head from 24 to 36. She was all that time. And then in 37, we're going to have one person. And guess who got to be? It was the guy. And she just becomes like a middle management at that point. So she was, if these major collectors and authors had never heard of her, one of the ironies too, her name is Lillian Rosine. So in my research, she started out as an actress, like supporting actress at Universal and Westerns and things, working with Lon Chaney. She mentioned in a couple of articles. Well, Lon Chaney was the first one to give me my first makeup and suggested I go into makeup. So Michael Blake, the makeup, and
Yeah, he's terrific.
And Lon Chaney, historian, had never heard of her. So, David Stin had never heard of her. Darren Barnes and Daryl Rooney, MGM collectors of women of this period had never heard of her.
Wow.
So, to find out, here she's, in many ways, like others, they were sort of almost written out of history or sort of, pushed to the side. So trying to give her, and most of these women their due. So it was digging for stuff on a lot of these women.
What was the biggest surprise that you found in doing this?
Well, I mean, literally, I knew women worked in a variety of fields, but literally they covered the bases. So, the things we consider more female, costume or writers, but prop masters, projectionists, and a lot of these women, before there were Rosie the Riveters in World War II, they're basically the same thing in World War One. The men went off, and so women had to do roles, and then got pushed out of those when the guys came back. But so women did everything. I mean, salespeople. You do not hear of women as salespeople in the teens and 20s, and to think one was an international sales exec. So that so women were doing everything. And to make that known to people, it's like, yeah, you're not just in fields that were not feminine, but there were women in them, and that how integral they were to making the industry move ahead. And they were known and accepted. I have found an article from 1915, Robert Grau, who ends up writing the book Theater Science in 1516 and then dies a year later, basically says, yeah, women have made this field. This is the field for women to go into and all this. So he's acknowledging in 1915. But it's Wall Street money coming in, and then unions was the death knell, both of those in the 20s of pushing the women out.
And the Great Depression, do you think that also made an impact?
Well, I mean, it was, but
that was later.
But I mean, Wall Street money comes in, and here women had been in virtually everything, and it's all of a sudden, okay, we're going to follow business rules. The reason women were there, as were immigrants and people of color, business and ruling elites did not accept that, it was like social media and computers 40 years ago. Who's going to want to use a computer at their home? Social media? Who's going to want to go online and contact people? So the ruling and business elite did not accept it. So it's a way for people that were not, elites, just the regular people to come up and do things. And so women were accepted in doing things. And it's the teens, when women are fighting for the right to vote, they're moving ahead for that. But the Wall Street money that's when in the 20s we get the studios as we know them. They need money to do that. So Wall Street comes in, well, we're going to do business practice now.
Okay.
So women start getting pushed out. And it's the late 20s when unions start getting formed. A lot of the unions were formed by, say, like mobsters from Chicago, very patriarchal. So, that's another thing. Right. They're not going to have women. So they get pushed out, even written out of history. I mean, you go through some of the history books, even written at the late 20s, they know these women, because some of these people have been writing 10 or 15 years, but the women are either sort of denigrated or cut down on what they've done, or just totally, gone. So it became, it's over, especially starting in the 70s, 80s, people starting trying to dig to get information, where they're women and
Wow.
who they were and what they did.
Tell me about the women of color that you came across and highlighted in this book.
So there's
That's
women of color
very
of
important.
all kinds of things. Asian American. So the first before Anime Wong is Zuroki. I don't know that she officially became an American citizen, but so Asian American of Japanese descent, coming when she's 6 to the United States. An actress, and then when her husband Seiji Hayakawa forms his company, she does like costumes and hair. She wants to be authentic to the Japanese look and the costumes and everything. Of course, Anime Wong, she was not the first Chinese woman on the screen. She's the first woman to become a star. In Chinese, we obviously has been getting a lot of play over the last several years. Hispanic, we know of 2 Hispanic women. Well, 3, but the 2 really big ones were Myrtle Gonzalez from here in LA, first big Hispanic star, and then Beatrice Michelina, who goes from opera into sort of starring and producing with her own company. We have African Americans, Evelyn Freer, who was an actress, sadly dies in the early 30s, very young. So what all she could have done with her career. The most, in a way, important person of color who was mostly forgotten was Hattie Burn, African American hairdresser, who I don't know that I totally believe the origin story that Julia Fay discovers her at a downtown hairdressers that she claimed, because she had done stuff for Ints. There still is stuff hidden, finding stuff there, but for DeMille to hire, and then she works in all the DeMille major period pictures from 19 to 24, Valentino period pictures of this period, Pola Negri. So she's Paramount is, making her an important person. Sadly, she dies in 24. Am I forgetting anyone else? Hispanic, African American, Chinese. So there were women there, and doing things. I mean, here, Beatrice Michelina with her own company, Anime Wong, a major actress, Evelyn Freer, others, Zora Hurston, the poet, who is doing ethnographic filming. There were things in the South. She did not language, music, she did not want lost. So she's like doing documentary filmmaking, going to these towns to film on her own, not for anyone else. So there were, people of color, men and women, who were doing things in this period. More of them with more opportunities at that period than they would have when the major studios start really going in the 30s and 40s.
I find sometimes on my cemetery tour, June Mathis is on it. And sometimes I have people go, wait a minute, what? What do you mean? There were a lot of women screenwriters back then. And when I tell them, they're very surprised. But then I think, there's probably more of female screenwriters and directors in silent film than there are today in 2025.
Oh, definitely. I mean, the period, the 1910 to 1920, that's in a way when the women had the most power in the film industry. AFI, during their study, looks like it was about 30% of women, women were 30% of screenwriters. But directors, Universal alone had 11.
11. Carl Laemmle, so progressive. Love him.
There were probably, in going through the research I did for my friend from like 1910 to about 1928, at least 23 women that directed. It might have only been one picture, but women that directed. Literally women were in everything. So trying to give them, opportunity to be known and to be recognized. Some of their family members didn't even know this when I was doing research.
Wow. Do you have any behind the scenes stories that you encountered working on this book? I'd be very curious to know.
2 of them. So the Marianne Joachimson, who was the poster designer. And the one thing to set it up, many of these women, they came in just like guys. They were supporting family. Some were widows. Some were the oldest child. Some were it was all women in the family. She's the youngest, so they're going to work. Marianne Joachimson came from a rich family. Did not need to work. She and her husband lived at 26 Central Park South. So not a person who actually really needs a job. But she was a painter. She had studied, was doing things. I still don't know how Fox hired her, but she was a poster designer for Fox for 6 years. So unfortunately, her husband dies in about 31. She quits in 32, never remarries, never has children. But she's an anti-Maine. She traveled the world. Every time you move, though, of course, you tend to get rid of stuff. So
Yep.
I found an archive. I thought, oh my gosh, this is great. Here in California, she lived to be 101. All they had was stuff in the last 20 years of her life. Because of the 20s, that was the time she lived there, Santa Cruz. So sadly, nothing on her. And then the woman, a stills photographer. Everyone considered Ruth Harriet Louise the first stills photographer. So during the pandemic, and I love stills photography, so I go
I know
to
you do.
Media History Digital Library, put in like stills photography, stills photograph. Only 1 year, but Camera Magazine listed every studio with the head of the stills department at that studio and the head of the darkroom for every studio. And there is Dorothy Hinton Mail listed as head of both stills and darkroom for two studios. Christie and Strand Mutual, both comedy companies. But then the sad thing, I contact a comedy an expert of that period, and he says, well, Mary, unfortunately, those two studios never credited photographers anywhere. So I have a photo from one of the companies, might have taken it, that's all I can say. So I discovered her great niece and the great grandson. Great niece has never responded to me. The great grandson, we get into first an email and then like a letter back and forth. He did not know she'd been a photographer. He had no photographs. She started in Montana, came to LA. So no photographs that she had taken. He didn't even have a photo of her. So I have no photo of her, only a photo she might have taken. I'm still looking. I've got one other place where she lived. I've contacted every place where she worked. So far, nothing. So to know if I'll even know what she ever looks like. And her life is sort of sad in certain ways. I mean, she was one that definitely came in because she needed to make money. Her first husband, they had 3 children. They had a photo studio in Montana. She mostly developed the photos, and he was the photographer, but he would go on expeditions, and so she photographed. He died in the hospital, and he was like in his early 30s. Left with 3 children. Family in California, comes to Sacramento, attempts to establish 2 photo studios up there for a short time, and they dissolved. Ends up down here in LA. She works for Hartsook, one of the major stills photographs companies, and she's developing the photos. Which there would not, women did, if you notice some of the stills of that period sometimes had these interesting etched backgrounds. The women would etch the backgrounds, but it was mostly men that usually developed the photos. Well, I came across newspaper articles that the chemicals like caught fire. I'm hoping she was burned on her chest because one said they thought she was close to dying. I hope it was not on her face. I have no idea, but so she became the studio's head after the injury. And she could have done it for more years, only the 1 year, thanks to that listing. But she had married by that point, and her second husband at that point ran a grocery store. Well, in their early 20s, they have family in Sacramento. So he decides they're going to move up there, and he was going to work for the railroad. So she spent the next 20 something years of her life until she died processing photos in a Kodak. Anyone could take in and process your photos. Wow. So you just wonder what she would have. There was all these stories about Ruth Harriet Louise in the late 20s, things in fan magazines or newspapers with her credit. What did Dorothy think to see all that? She never came forward. I mean, the great grandson, didn't even know of that. Yeah, I did that. I did that before her.
It's very sad.
Yeah. So there were some sad stories. Yes.
Oh.
So, yeah. Some of these women, or some lived, or the irony of an Oscar winner that's forgotten by the studio she won an Oscar for. Julia Heron, she was one that had to go to work because it was her grandmother, her mother, and her. They moved from like Montana again to LA. So she's working entertainment industry. ends up as an assistant in set dressing and ends up must have been an expert at it and loved it. Because within 3 years, famous players Lasky makes her a full set decorator at the studio. DeMille leaves, a duo independent, he takes her with him. So she works with him, but then decides, I want to work with William Cameron Menzies. So goes to United Artists and works with Fairbanks and Pickford on their films. And they write stories about her in press kits for their films. And it's called her the first woman set decorator. Goes to Goldwyn, works on films like Dead End, Best Years of Our Lives,
Wow.
Woman in the Window, goes to Universal, works on the Douglas Sirk movies, Imitation of Life in the 50s, and then shares in the Oscar for production design on Spartacus. So I know an archivist at Universal I contact to say, well, do you have a photo of her? All I have is this little tiny photo from a fan magazine or any kind of information. And she says, no, we don't seem to have anything. It's like she won an Oscar for Spartacus in 1960 and you don't have anything. I mean, she did not go to the Academy Award ceremony that year. So I looked but she's not in the photo. So but Universal, she wins an Oscar. You don't have any information on your Oscar winners. So, yeah.
Wow.
So finding photos of these women has been a challenge. I mean, I've gotten lucky on eBay for a lot of them actually. So that has been a good thing.
What were some of the men you encountered in researching this book who were very supportive of women? Because it seems to me that Carl Laemmle and DeMille were both champions of women. And DeMille had, Anne Balkins was his editor. She was in his contract, right? That he didn't make a film without her editing that film.
She was his second female editor. On Squaw Man, he had a different woman.
Okay.
And then Anne Balkins came in later. I think he respected women when he went independent. So he took Julia Heron as set decorator, the Paramount reference librarian. The first person to establish a reference librarian was a woman, Elizabeth McGaffey. He took her with him.
Good.
Hattie, he had brought in like Hattie as the doing the hair and that kind of thing. So he was a one of supporting. Only problem was when he went independent, and he went to MGM. I think he could bring people over, but by the time he goes back to Paramount has people in these positions, so the women have to look for jobs at that point. But so he was Carl Laemmle. Part of it is like they were really cranking out the films, and they need people. And some of the women were actresses at Universal and stepped in. Others just started as screenwriters. Lois Weber did a little bit of everything. Ida Mae Park was writing scripts. Her husband, Joseph DeGrasse, was directing things with Lon Chaney. And they need another director. She steps in and loved it. I mean, she wrote about it for a variety of places. So she directed the second most at Universal behind Lois Weber. So yeah, they were two guys, but there were women that were mentors who were forgotten.
I want to hear about those too.
So Lois Weber actually was one. Universal, she was big enough. For 4 years, they let her set up her own studio in Santa Monica Boulevard. She hires a woman to be business manager. And so what woman do we know at any other studio, even today, was the business manager buying all the products, be it, paper to buying tires to film, to huge equipment, is making those contracts and buying that stuff. So she was helping, but the two that did the most, and sadly, there do not seem to be archives of them to have more paperwork to see what their whole history of their careers, were Norma and Constance Talmadge. Norma and Constance their mother was like Mary Pickford, helping them along. They started out as actresses. By the late teens, they're big enough to have their independent production companies. Start out with Selznick, then Selznick and Skank, Norma's husband. They go to First National and then eventually end up at United Artists. So from the women they hired, they were involved. It wasn't Joe playing poker with these women to hire them. They had, for a short time, a production designer was a woman, Elsa Lopez, who became a research designer. Claire West, the costume designer, who had been with DeMille. They hired her away from DeMille to come to them. Their head publicist was a woman, Beulah Livingstone. And for a short time, the woman I'm finding so little information on, I want more. They had a location manager who was a woman.
Oh,
So, they were the ones saying, okay, Joe, we want you to hire these people and do more. And then Constance herself. One way I got a lot of information, 22, 23, Constance wrote a syndicated magazine, newspaper column. And it was about like 50 positions for women in the entertainment industry. So there was started out with one big article, and then some she would go, and she didn't do all 50, but they would focus on one person. Here's like Ruth. The only photo I have of Ruth is the photo that is in this article. But so she mentions, here's like a teacher or the writer, editor, as location manager, showing that women, and this is happening in 22, 23, just as the Wall Street money is coming in, sadly. But so here, women are doing everything. She's promoting all this, women like you could do it too. Here's, a variety of things. So they were really trying to help women in a variety of ways, both women already in the industry and ways are showing if you want to come here, jobs that anyone or women particularly would be good at. Let
let me ask you this. For people that want to get this book, does our beloved Larry Edmonds in Hollywood have it? Because I'm always trying to steer people to go buy it there. Don't buy it on Amazon if you can avoid it. Give the brick and mortar store some love.
Yeah, so Jeff definitely has it. I have done pre-orders. I will autograph if you order and you want that. We had some before the TCM Film Festival. We've got, we just did a signing Sunday, American Cinematheque. So yes, he's the go-to person. I mean, you could get it other independent bookstores near you, but if you want an autograph, the best place to go to is Larry Edmonds, and I can autograph.
Okay, Danny Miller's asking us a question.
Okay.
He said, I wonder why Julia Heron didn't attend the Academy Awards the year that she won. Where is her Oscar today? That's a really question.
That is, she was one who never married, and so obviously never had children. So it would have been, and I didn't really see any sister, so it would have been a distant cousin. So who knows, like happened with that kind of thing. And she would have been, she worked up until the late 60s. So she, was still active. But they were busy at that time. And so maybe she was busy on a project, decided not to go. I don't know. It does not mention anywhere in the trades or stories. But
wow. It's interesting how you're talking about some of these women that didn't marry to have kids. And, I love a good flea market or antique store. It's kind of one of my things. And sometimes I'll find scrapbooks and family photo albums and stuff at some of these flea markets. And I've never done this, but I've been very tempted to, is to buy it and try to track down the family and send it to someone in that family. Because I feel like it's maybe a missing piece, not maybe it is, a missing piece of their history and their story. And we both probably know from personal experience that when someone dies, a lot of chaos can ensue and things get kind of scattered into the wind and maybe mistakenly tossed or disorganized. So I kind of wonder, like some of that stuff, what could have gotten lost over the years, or if maybe their death was young or sudden and the family had to get everything out.
The thing I think about too is like maybe people not realizing at the time how important they were, just assuming it was like a natural thing or whatever. Viola Lawrence, who's the first editor, Viola Mallory Lawrence, I haven't just found out yet if we were actually related, but she was head of Columbia's editing department. She got into editing probably under the man who became her husband, Frank Lawrence, because they met at Vitagraph. He brought her with him when he came to Universal in 1917, but then she only worked a couple of years for nepotism reasons, went to other places. He only worked until about 31, was a young guy, a youngish, and basically retired. She works through the 60s, head of Columbia's editing department, works with people like John Ford, Howard Hawks, Nicholas Ray, Orson Welles, Harry Cohn. And you see photos of her, she looks like this sweet little grandmotherly type. But she must have had a spine of steel to deal with all these guys.
Surviving Harry Cohn alone.
And but so she died. Her family, which it either was like cousins or once again like nieces or nephews, there are 3 little boxes that they gave to Cal State Fullerton. So I was able to go see, I wrote an article for Film Noir magazine. It's in 1950, a British critic wrote her, and he ended up coming with the book that became a director, Carol Rice, I think that's how you pronounce his name, and wanted to know about the cutting of Lady from Shanghai. So there's a two-page single-spaced letter, and she says, well, it's a few years ago, but so she gives details, how she did, how they had to cut the funhouse sequence, and all the many prints that had to be cut to cut down all that kind of stuff because they didn't have computers. Other things, I mean, she was diplomatic, but basically saying wasn't the most organized. And he was even shocked sometimes at how the serendipitous way things turned out, because he didn't plan. So, but yeah, so you can tell how integral she was in that,
Wow.
so there were a few photos, more photos, only a few in front of editing equipment. And those were later. I was hoping for one from like the teens or the early 20s. There's photos of her. There's not even their wedding photo didn't even make it, which I was sort of disappointed. Only one photo of Frank, but an autograph photo from Chester Morris, because some people that love Orson Welles claimed, oh, she was the dragon lady, how she cut Lady in Shanghai. Well, the autograph photo from Chester Morris, where they're standing by her thing in the mid to late 30s. Thank you for being so sweet. So obviously he didn't think she was. So there's that. It was a great photo. It was a later period and it didn't fit. She only had 2 Oscar nominations, and one was for Peppy, which is a big, all these different stars make all these cameos about a kid in like his bull and that kind of thing. Well, she and the guy co-edited it. It was a series, and so like first you just see film strips and you can sort of see their faces behind it, and then they sort of raise it a little bit and you see their faces, and then eventually like they raise it and you see she and he like with their scissors behind the film strips. But so there was only 3 little manuscript boxes that survived. And so at least there was something that survives. Most of these women, family didn't know. And the one thing, like the lady was the photographer, he said, was it his mother thought she was adopted? Well, some of the 3 children were very young when her first husband died. You would have thought they would have known that her second husband was the second husband. But so, I mean, maybe he did sort of adopt them, but so that whole thing was sort of an odd thing, it sounded like. So that might have been sadly another reason some of the photos didn't survive.
This is really interesting.
Yeah.
Let's look at some more questions. Let's see. Danny's asking, did you use gelatin powder or strips of gelatin? I used a gelatine powder, which comes in these little packets I found at the grocery store. We need photos of the kitchen disaster. Sadly, I didn't take them because it was such a horrible mess and I kind of panicked. So to be honest, I didn't think to take photos. I really should have. It's not 100% better in here, but it's about 80, 90%, which I will gladly take at this point. Yes, if anyone in the LA classic film community wants to meet up with me this week, you can sample some of this Turkish delight. And let's see. Danny Miller saying MGM was later very discriminating against women makeup artists. See Dottie Ponadell's story.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, you read she had her own makeup department. They did her office, they described like it was up on the 2nd floor where it was. I found an article, no photos, but they described where her office was. There's photos of her. I had to win one on eBay. There was no file of her, and I was not going to go through every MGM woman star to look for a photo of her. So I got lucky to find one on eBay. But yeah, and she went around the country doing lectures in department stores and other things. So
wow.
And then they decided, okay, we're just going to go with the guy. You're gone, Lillian.
Jeez. Danny says, I'm curious about Mary Eileen, the first child star who's mentioned in Mary's book. What is her story?
Okay, so she was an interesting thing, like a lot of people at the time did stock theater. So, she's a little child and doing little roles on the stage. She and her sister was Grace. So Marie and Grace is sort of, I don't know, and they were like a French type background. And their parents did some stuff, but it seems the 2 sisters are actually sort of the ones supporting the family doing
it's often the case with a lot of these child stars. They were literally paying for the whole family.
And so she gets discovered Thanhauser needs a child. And so becomes a Thanhauser kid. And so, and playing both because she was small and the way her hair was cut, she could be boys and girls. And they did sort of do that kind of thing. So she, and was very popular. I even have sheet music. They spell it the opera way, the Tannhauser Kid, with her on the cover. So, but about 1913, starts, and it probably her parents, because she's still basically a child, not a little tiny child, but probably, still a child, decide like try to get more stage roles, probably to make more money and do other things. And so Tannhauser, and they called the kidlet, so they sort of replaced her. And so they start going on the stage, doing things, stage performances. She did some shorts. She did a few features there in the mid to late teens. And then basically she and her sister off through like the 30s off and on are doing stuff on the stage. She married a couple of times. And by the 40s, she seems to have married a gentleman and moved to Florida, and then changed her name. But yeah, so she was performing, but her really film career, which is most important, is just a very short time with Tannhauser and stuff.
Wow. Okay. Very cool. Danny, I wonder why Julie Heron. Oh, we covered that one. Didn't attend the Academy Awards. Right. Well, that's all the questions we have coming in for now. But if you guys have more questions, please keep them coming in the comments, and Mary will definitely get back to you with answers. So, do you have more events coming up to promote the book?
Yes. So Tuesday, May 27th, I will be signing of Romans. So I'll talk a little bit about the book and background of some of the women and why it's important to know these women before I do the signing that night. Trying to set other stuff up here in LA. In July, I will be at the Niles SMA Silent Film Festival.
We love our Niles friends.
I'll be doing a presentation there and the book signing. Let's see, so right now, those are the two things that I just finished certain things that I'm trying to set up others. Hopefully, still not sure if they'll be having book signings, but if San Francisco Silent Film Festival has book signings, and they've already said them, I would be able to take part.
Someone asked me once, they said, geez, you have a lot of people who've done books on Hollywood Kitchen. And I say, well, first off, I'm really lucky to know a lot of incredible authors and people. But secondly, having co-written two myself, one of which was with you, Hollywood's Over the Holidays, I find it's harder to promote a book than it is to do one, because when you're writing, you're in like a little bubble where it's just you and your material and whatever, but then you have to go out into a world that is chaos in the world and convince people, hey, I know everything's nuts, but I have this book, you should pay attention. That is a hard battle. We went through a lot of that together on others.
So, and the irony thing is, so they want you to list all of this stuff like marketing opportunities, but then it's like, well, why am I giving this to you if you're going to make me do most of it? I mean, I'm hoping we've sent stuff for Film Week, Larry Mantle Air Talk. We haven't heard anything. Keep my fingers crossed, as we've been talking about this for months, that maybe UCLA will have me introduce a film and have a book screening this summer. So I'm still waiting to hear back on that. I'm sort of in contact with Culver City Historical Society, because I have women that sort of focused over like in Culver City area. All the studios I'm trying to contact about things. I might be doing something else for Hollywood Heritage again to tie in with the Paramount exhibit, the new exhibit that.
But really, it's an uphill battle to promote a book, and you really have to do almost all of it yourself. And books are not paths to riches either. So I like anything I can do on Hollywood Kitchen to help Larry Edmonds, to help my author friends. I want to do, because I love that, and I know how important that is.
Yes.
So let's see, if anybody else have any other questions here. Close Up needs to start scrub-a-dubbing. Yes, Annette, I should have tied scrub brushes over Close Up when he had zoomies. That was my bad. I should have done that. So oops. Yeah. All right. Well, I think that's about it for right now. But Mary, this has been very interesting. And
thank you for having me. And I was trying to give women these due. I mean, if it wasn't for women, immigrants, and people of color, we wouldn't have probably have had a film industry, because they're the ones who got it going. And then it was women audiences and women behind the camera that made the film so popular that Wall Street money wanted to come in and make the studios that we know. So it's really thanks to women that we have a film industry here in the United States.
Let's do a question before you wrap up. Okay. So, you know how I've noticed this too. In the old days, movies seemed to be geared toward women. when did that change? Because now I feel like, and I've worked in studios where they said, oh, men 18 to 30 are the audience that matters. And I remember sitting in a job meeting one day trying not to roll my eyes and just have an outburst as hard as I could. It's like, when did it become super young boys that matter and not adult women? Like, how did that happen?
Yeah, so yeah, women were the big thing of
Yeah.
once women, middle class women went and made it respectable, then that's when attendance exploded and they started directing films at women. David O. Selznick specifically, he wanted to make films for women. Most of his films were. And you see like that through the 50s. It's when the classic Hollywood system starts dying. We start getting more, I want to say male-oriented type things, but we start moving like Lawrence of Arabia.
The 60s is when it kind of started changing.
Moving that, and then especially we get to like Easy Rider and all those kind of things. And then Star Wars, I think really Star Wars jaws that period in the 70s.
The birth of the modern blockbuster.
And it's like guy things. And now, like the last 20 years or more, everything is directed at young men. And they've almost totally forgotten people older than 25 or like women. It's mostly directed. I mean, there are occasional films where we do target certain audiences, but yeah, the big films are directed at young.
But I do notice it seems like TV and streaming is where a lot of female content has gone, which I mean, I'm glad it still exists. That is a good thing in and of itself.
Yeah.
But it's interesting to see how that much has shifted.
Yeah, no, and I think sadly, I mean, it was always somewhat there from the 20s. I mean, the studios were doing sequels, they were doing prequels, all this kind of stuff back then, remaking movies.
Silent film they did.
But it's really become a big thing now, and they spend so much money. And usually those are, you know, I won't say action adventure. I don't want to say certain company names and that kind of stuff, but comic book and type of things were definitely directed more towards the young men. So they're spending so much money, they're very seldom making the little films that might be directed at when, and you know, that might have been like the Terms of Endearment 40 years ago,
range drama, the middle range films are not really a thing now.
So I mean, the sad thing of like at the TCM Film Festival of the gentleman who's in charge, Tom Rothman, in charge of Sony, is saying it's getting butts and seats. He has too many choices or too many things. People not wanting to drive unless it's, you have to go like the young guys, like, you know, will go for opening night of Spider-Man or whatever, or some other kind of cultural type thing that will direct people. And so he doesn't even have streaming. So he doesn't even have that choice to help him. So others can make things that, maybe the film becomes the loss leader to get people to stream it and stuff later. So, but we need to get people to go back to theatrical or that business is going to totally die. So.
Well, the good news is Sinners has done really well. Barbie and Oppenheimer, there are occasionally films that will come along that surprise everybody.
We need to get it a steady thing again and not just the occasional big movie that pulls everybody.
Well, I think with the pandemic and the economic problems we're having now and the strikes, there's a whole perfect storm, if you will.
That's true.
But any case, if you can get a hold of this book, guys, please do so because it's excellent. It's educational. I learned a heck of a lot. And
there's more than you would think that's out there. I mean, some of these women I was shocked to find as much as I did in the variety of places that, you know, on them. And some of them were very good at talking to the press and giving information. So there's others, I'm still parts of their lives I don't know. But yeah, to find out, and go to the early stories to find out women were doing everything. And many of them were happy to do the things that would not be considered female roles and that kind of thing.
Well, thank you, Mary. And thank you to everybody watching. I do have a Patreon if anybody wants to contribute. All proceeds go to help buy more ingredients and make more things and buy cleaning product for my very messy kitchen. So thank you. Please stay tuned for more food, fun, and film history from Hollywood Kitchen.